let's get started. I'm as the director of Transit Alliance. I'm with Scudder Wag from Jared Walker & Associates, and our special guest today is Carlos Cruz-Casas, assistant director in the Miami-Dade Transit. Carlos, how long have you been with the department, by the way?
It's going to be 4 years now.
Oh, cool.
4 years, yeah.
Amazing. And before then, you were with the city of Miami.
I was a transportation manager in Miami, yeah.
Cool. So we're very lucky to have Carlos today. We're going to talk about a few things. We'll just talk about, first of all, the department's role and relationship within the redesign, and then we're going to talk about how to make buses more useful for more people, how to make the network more useful for more people, and we're going to talk about 4 ways to do that. But before we get into it, Carlos, the department is obviously heavily involved in the redesign process, like since the beginning.
We are.
And you personally have had a very large role in creating this project to a large degree. Can you talk a bit more about how the department is plugged into the process and what the department's role is through the redesign?
Yeah. So of course, there's no secret that our goals and what we have for the department is the same that you want, right? We want a better transportation system that is reliable and efficient and that can serve more people through Miami-Dade County. From the beginning, of course, we believe that this is an effort that includes everyone. The administration, the public in general, and the advocacy group. I think there's something that we have to bring everyone together because it's a transportation system for everyone. Of course, we are very vested in this development, understanding that ultimately we are the providers of public transportation for Miami-Dade County. With that in mind, we want to make sure that we own the process from beginning to end, because ultimately we need to take it from here to put those wheels in the road and continue to provide the service for the years to come.
Yeah, and something worth mentioning is that this relationship between advocacy and department is the first time it's happening in the country. It's a rather unique combination of different entities sort of coming together for the same goal, and I think I personally applaud the department, the administration, and I think it's something that Scudder, I don't know if you want to talk to, but it's a unique construct.
It is a pretty unique construct that the Transit Alliance has such a prominent role in leading large parts of the study and really bringing it to fruition. It's a unique partnership, something you haven't really seen anywhere else, and it speaks to the strength of the advocacy community here in Miami and wanting to really make transit as good as it can possibly be for your community.
Yeah. Yeah, and the department's openness to...
And the department's openness to partner with those advocates. A lot of other agencies might feel a little...
They run away.
I'm losing control of this. This is a little scary. But, Carlos and the whole department have been great partners so far.
Yeah. Okay, so with that said, we're going to, as promised, we're going to talk about the four things that could be some of the factors that lead to a network that's more useful for more people. And we're going to try to do this as quickly as possible so we can get to your questions. So the first one we're going to talk about is density. And Scudder, I'm going to hold this up pretty close, but if you can explain, what are people looking at here?
2 bus lines, both have 2 buses on them. In this example, you have twice as many people.
Those are little houses.
Those are little houses, half as many people here. Naturally, twice as many potential riders as here. Geometry tells you that top example is a higher potential ridership corridor.
And we know that sounds incredibly obvious, but like within the course of a redesign, we're just trying to give you a sense of like what are some of the factors we're looking at, and to give you a specific example that both of you can talk about. Before we talk about it though, let's examine. So there are a lot of colors that are going to show up on this map, but don't worry, we're going to explain exactly what's going on. So all of these colors, Scudder, very briefly, what's going on with this rainbow here?
Darker, redder colors mean high density, jobs, and people all together. So downtown Miami, Brickell, really dark red. Lighter colors generally mean less density, less activity, less people, less jobs.
Yeah, and we're focusing just on this area because we're going to use one route as a specific example that I don't know if you guys want to talk about, and that is the 8 here. So I'm going to take away the activity density for a second so you can see what's going on here. Scudder, what are all these bubbles on this route happening here? These blue and red bubbles.
So this is the Route 8. Runs mostly on 8th Street. Good numbering. Nice job. All of these dots are telling you how many people are getting on at every stop every day. So you can see a lot of these are really big. There's a lot of people. The bigger they are, the more people are getting on. And that's because it's so dense along most of this route. There's a lot of people who are near it, a lot of people willing to ride. And you see where the colors of the density are darker, the bubbles are
Yeah,
bigger.
you see the darker here, the lighter colors in here for sure.
And the dots are smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a natural reaction.
And let's use a contrasting example for another route. And again, not to pick on specific places, but to use two examples that maybe could tell a bit of a story. So I'm going to do my Control tab here.
So
wait,
moved a
hold
little
on.
bit north.
Yes, exactly. Where are we?
So we are up further north in the county, 103rd Street here, 62nd Street here. So this is Liberty City area and going north. And if you turn on the activity density,
Ignore the bubble.
you see that the colors are generally less dark up in this area.
Yep.
And Hialeah is off to the side here, and Route 33 cuts right across the middle of this. And you see that the dots are smaller than they were on Route 8.
It is important to know that they have the same local service.
Both of these run every 30 minutes.
Exactly.
So they have the same frequency, very similar span of service.
Mhm.
So all other things being equal, you would expect to get the same ridership, but they're not equal because the density has such a big factor.
So I want to talk about the second thing to consider within building a network that's more useful for more people, and that's walkability. So Scudder, do you want to say what's going on here between these two diagrams?
That's a stop in the middle of this circle. That circle is how far you could fly in a quarter mile if you had a jetpack. The dark colored streets are the streets you can actually walk on in a quarter mile walk. And these little gray streets on the edge are the ones you can't reach in a quarter mile walk because you got to walk, along the grid of streets. Down here, you don't have a grid of streets. It's a bunch of suburban streets with cul-de-sacs that don't all connect together. And thus you can't get as far out from that bus stop.
Because they're windy.
Because they're windy, they don't connect. And so the market area that transit can actually reach is smaller because you can't actually connect.
Yeah. So let's look at an example of how this plays out in Miami-Dade County, and this is the place that has bus service, but
it has pretty decent bus service, 30-minute service all day, some peak routes, Kendall Lakes. A challenge that you have is if you're running bus service down here on 72nd or on 56th or even through here, it's hard to walk from here out to 137th because there's no direct route. There's so many cul-de-sacs, it's hard to get out. As opposed to, closer in to most of the city where there are connected streets all across.
Carlos, do you want to talk about, as a department, you probably get a lot of comments and feedback about trying to get as close to people as possible. What are you thinking about when you're faced with situations like this?
So when I face a situation like this, I'm looking first at accessibility and how we can get to that. And if there's two ways for people to get to transit. Either I walk to the stop or the stop walks to me or moves toward where I am. If I were to start deviating the transit system to get to one particular area, I'm not only providing perhaps a better service or accessibility to that particular person, I'm relaying everyone else on that particular corridor. So for me we need to strike a balance between the straight shot of the route and the access to it to make sure that the route serves most of the community and not just one particular person asking for that particular stop.
And that gets to the third factor.
The third factor, Scudder, tell us what's going on with this diagram.
So when you have straight streets and all of the destinations are right near the street, the offices, the shops, and the houses close to the street, you can run in a straight line and people feel like they're connecting very easily between places and can get to the stop. When you have Walmart's a half a mile back from the street on a parking lot, you have to really run the bus back off the main street in order to actually get there. And so you're constantly going back into cul-de-sacs and so on to get to those places and actually serve them, and that costs more time and more money because time is money, with paying bus drivers, and that means it's harder to get as many riders for the same dollar.
Yeah. So this is something we're all familiar with, and if you go to Transalliance's website, you can see some examples of routes like this. And I just want to emphasize that these routes, let's not think about them as bad.
Right.
Let's not use the word bad, because they do serve a purpose.
They serve a purpose of getting to these places where the land use makes it challenging to be in straight lines.
But
Connecting places quickly and easily.
that's the main decision. Like as a transit department, like you need to strike that balance between, and of course the community input has a large part to do with what that balance should be. Doing routes like these that are expensive to run and maybe not as productive, and doing more routes that are more straight lines.
Certainly. No, for us, it's strike the balance. We want to make sure that ultimately it's public transportation, it's transportation for the community as a whole. So we want to make sure that we are able to serve the community, but we strike a balance ultimately in where we put our services, our resources, that we can get the most amount of people there.
So the last thing to talk about is distance. And Scudder, what's happening with distance?
So basic simple principle, if you have big destinations that are close together, you run a 15-minute bus route between those two places, it doesn't take you very long, so it costs you less, so you get more riders. When they're really far apart and you're trying to run a 15-minute bus route, it takes you longer, it takes you more buses, it costs you more to get the same number of riders.
Mm-hmm.
And so ridership relative to costs is not as good.
And let's use an example here. And again, to be clear, we as Miamians, we've put ourselves in this situation where we spread ourselves out so much that we even have this situation in the first place.
Right. Again, this is all about the geometry of what is on the ground. It's not about who you are. It's about, you know, where you are and what the land use is that you've built over the last, 50, 100 years in this community. And so here in South Dade, as an example, Route 104, which is in green here, it has a lot of larger dots, more people boarding out here where things are denser out in West Kendall. But there's large stretches of relatively less dense to get before you get to Metro Rail. And so you have a distance problem that makes it more expensive to reach all of that activity out here and costs more per rider to reach.
And again, as a department, this ends up being very challenging because you have to run these routes that are really long, and during these large segments, they aren't picking up and dropping off a lot of people, but they end up being very expensive. And again, this whole conversation is about balance because it's not about doing one thing or the other. It's about figuring out that balance between doing how much of which one.
Yeah, you can see this is very telling. We have this route, which is about 10 miles in total. We're forced to run 16-minute headway. Right. Because it's so long, we don't get that activity that gets people on and off, and we end up with a not as productive route that we then, limited resources, force us to have that segment.
Yeah. So that sort of goes over the main factors of what we've been talking about. We hope that it wasn't too jargonistic and rather understandable, but like to recap, buses have more riders where there's more density, where more people are packed together. Yeah. That's number one. Let me get my script back. Buses generally have more ridership when it's easier to get to and from the bus stop, where you don't have to walk in a squiggly line, where you can just walk to the bus stop. There's good walkability. Buses generally have more riders when routes are connecting places on a straight line, and those not only do those places exist, but you can draw a straight line between them to connect them efficiently. And buses generally have more ridership when those places that you're connecting are closer together as opposed to very far apart. So,
and the last thing we didn't really say, a walkability factor and having easy to walk, is that you can cross the street easily. That there are safe crossings and crosswalks, and it's comfortable enough to cross the street in enough places that you don't have to walk a mile down the street before you can cross the other side. Because if you do, you really don't. If you have to walk 2 or 3 miles before you cross the street, you only really have service in one direction.
Yeah. Lance, do we have any questions, anger, comments, concerns, confusion, sports questions?
Very angry that I forgot.
Weather inquiries.
So we have one question, but it seems slightly unrelated. But it's from Gabriel, and he asks, why at the moment can't Metro Rail users park at the MIC Center, which I guess he's referring to the Miami Intermodal Center. He's just wondering, why folks can't do that, because he thinks that, he says it's barricaded 24/7, and it just, I guess, deters users from using that particular station.
So usually we skip these low altitude questions, but since we have you here, and if you have a good answer.
I probably have to look a little bit more into it.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar. There's different parking facilities at the MIC and the Miami Intermodal Center. We're talking about the rental car facility. That's one. At the Metro Rail bus terminal, Tri-Rail, there's surface parking lot in it. Not sure that's what Gabriel is referring to. We can look in more detail, and if it's fenced out, we can start figuring that out. Yeah.
Lance, do we have any other questions? All right. So then that's it for today. Today's was a bit more technical. I guess, you know,
You're gonna blame it on me now, right?
No, I'm not gonna blame it on
It's
you.
all my fault.
No,
It's
no,
always
no.
my fault.
No, but I think it's important that we start to understand that, you know, I think it's in the effort of bus systems aren't random. They aren't dictated by a particular person saying, I want this to go there, I want this to go here, I want this to go there.
Mm-hmm.
That there are factors that combine to make something that could make sense. And those lines can be drawn a little bit in some way.
I
Sorry,
think
I got to a certain part in the stream and I laughed at a comment about. I forgot.
I think the other thing to emphasize is these 4 factors are geometric factors that define, you know, what's the possible success of when you put a bus route on the street.
Mm-hmm.
And they imply if you want to get higher ridership, you follow that recipe of going to those places where you have those 4 factors primarily.
Right.
That assumes you want high ridership, which again, as we've talked about before, if you want to focus more on that, that's a value question that the community needs to answer.
Yep.
So we actually got a couple of questions that were posed via Twitter because via our new Tropic account, we asked people for questions and said that they can message us if they had any. And so one that came up was, how is the Better Bus Project addressing cutting routes versus frequency and that sort of debate? Is the frequency in more direct routes, or should it be both, or what's kind of the ideal solution? I know we've touched on some of that in previous sessions, but if you want to dive into that.
I'm going to squeeze it in the middle.
We'll give you some space.
But no, come in the center. We're all fine. I think yesterday's episode would be the best episode to go to for how we're going to decide this. I'll sum it up very briefly. Like, we have surveys out there right now. We have around 1,500 responses so far to help everyone have input into where those priorities should stand. We held a priorities workshop with elected officials and community leaders to have them play an interactive exercise to sort of play that game of like, which one should it be and how much of which. So I would encourage you to go to www.betterbus.miami/survey, and you can take the survey that I'm talking about.
And I would just add, there's future opportunities
Yeah.
fall
This is not the
to help answer that question.
Yeah.
This isn't the
This is just the initial
only
thermometer.
opportunity.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
No, basically exactly that. This is not the end. There's a lot more opportunity. We're going to be presenting with different extreme cases, if you will, to start getting the information back. One thing that I want to mention in the previous comment about the ridership model, right, is, and I think that I heard this from Jared himself when he was talking about that the opportunities for ridership growth in Miami-Dade County is overwhelmingly larger or higher during the midday and off-peak. When you create this type of network,
Let's define it. Midday being like service that's like noon,
No
around
commuting
noon,
patterns.
around
Yeah.
noon or 1 or 2 o'clock, not during the peak hour.
not during
And
the peak hour.
off-peak being mainly like we're talking about weekends, like putting more buses on the streets
Exactly.
during weekends.
And you can tell with the recipe that you mentioned that that's what lends itself to provide a better service, right? When you have things that are closer together, not necessarily your home and your job, but it's your home and the grocery, your home, your doctor, and all these different things that come in. Those are the trips that right now we're missing largely in the transit network. And that's what we need to start focusing. And I think that's something that we should start highlighting. This is a service that is not only for commuters, it's for our community 24/7.
There could be a network that becomes an all-day network as opposed to just focused on rush hours.
We've talked a lot about where, we haven't talked a lot about when.
Mhm.
And you're getting to the question of when is service available? And that is a really important question because, for example, in Houston, we helped lead the discussion about redesigning their network. One of the big outcomes was a big increase in service on Saturday and Sunday, which serves so many people who work in retail, who work in entertainment jobs, who work in those sectors where the busiest days are Saturday and Sunday.
Mhm.
And we saw enormous increases in Saturday and Sunday ridership because so many more people could rely on the bus 7 days a week.
Mhm.
Do you have anything else, Hans?
Yeah, just another question on, I guess, sort of the process that you all are following. So what kind of outreach are you all doing in communities of color, and then also for seniors and those sorts of groups?
Mm-hmm. So Trans Alliance's focus has always been on like going directly to riders and going directly to places. So like the survey is not only being done directly with riders, but also online if someone can't, we don't expect anyone to go and find the people who are doing the surveys. The workshops themselves, we're actually focusing a mix of not only workshops in the I'm going to put this in quotes, like the traditional way where like there'll be a time and a place, but also workshops at major transit terminals, which means that if you are a regular transit rider, you are very important to this process. And we don't want you to be like, it should be 6 o'clock on a Saturday, I need to go, I need to get out. But we'll try to hit as many transit terminals as possible, so like during your regular commute, you have a chance to interact with us. But also, there's many other ways beyond those. If you go to our website, betterbus.miami, you can schedule a phone call with us, you can send us an email, we're on Twitter, we might have a few virtual workshops as well. So it's all to come. Anything else?
Excellent.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Scudder, for joining us again for day 3. Thank you,
Carlos.
Carlos,
Thanks for
staying late and surviving your red-eye fight to be with us.
I'm gonna go to sleep now.
The next 8 hours of this live stream will be all of us taking a nap.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much again,
Thank you.
and thank you for joining us.
Good night.